Good morning and good evening to everyone. My name is Kritika Rajkumar, and I am the head of legal at CareSpaces. On behalf of CareSpaces and SNS Arts Development Consultancy, I would like to welcome every member of our diverse Indian arts community to the second session of our five-part series, I'm a Professional Too. When we all hear or say the words, I'm a professional too, we are committing to providing respect to one another. In our first session, we discussed facets of ethical professional conduct in the context of workspaces. In our second session, we discussed the importance of protecting one's creative IP. Our series as a whole places importance on the pillars of ethical professionalism. With SNS, we share the common goal of bringing more accountability and ethical professional practices to our Indian art spaces through this series. This third session specifically articulates what creative, monetary, and other value means to artists and other stakeholders in the field, as well as the fundamentals of the arts economies of this Carnatic music and Bharatanatyam communities as they currently exist. After hearing the experiences of our panelists, we will highlight gaps in the system as it exists today and roadmap to move forward in order to ensure apt payment and valuation of the artists and art form as a whole. We are all here because we are ardent fans and supporters of the Indian performing arts. This session is aimed at helping us be better consumers as well. So here is Value Your Work, the third session of our series, and I would like to introduce our moderators for this session.
Neha Krishnamachari is the co-founder and head of finance at CareSpaces. She is currently a finance and strategy professional working in the media industry at NBC Universal. Prior to her current role, Neha was at JP Morgan Chase after completing a double major in finance and management, as well as a minor in South Asian studies from NYU's Stern School of Business. Neha is a Carnatic violinist by training and is also the president of Yuva Sangeeta Lahari, an organization aimed at providing performance platforms for youth Carnatic musicians across North America. At CareSpaces, Neha is able to combine her interest in social impact with music and her financial background. Neha is specifically passionate about the future of community organizing and aptly compensating artists to sustain Carnatic music in North America. Here is Neha Krishnamachari. Gohan Venkatraman is the co-head of resources and research at CareSpaces. He is a fourth-year PhD student in biomedical informatics at Stanford University and a Vainika of the Karekudi Parampara. He started learning Veena from his mother, Srimati Lakshmi Venkatraman, at age 8 and continued his discipleship under Kalaimamani Srimati Ranganayaki Rajagopalan, herself a direct disciple of the legendary Karekudi Sri Samba Shivayar. He continues to enlarge and refine his scholarship and repertoire under the tutelage of Sri R.K. Sriram Kumar and Delhi Sri P. Sundararajan. As an ever student of the art form, Gohan is passionate about reforms that will bring Carnatic music into a new era of transparency, equity, and visibility. Here is Gohan Venkatraman. I am Priyanka Dinakar, co-head of resources and research at CareSpaces. I, along with Sachin, will be managing Q&A for today. Now I will hand it over to our moderators to get the session started. Thank you.
Thanks so much for the introduction, Kritika and Priyanka. Before we get started, we also want to recognize our CareSpaces and SNS core team members who are working behind the scenes today to make sure our session runs smoothly. I'll hand it off to our first team member, Sachin.
Hey everyone, I'm Sachin Pense, Education and Peer Support Lead at CareSpaces. As Priyanka mentioned, I'll be helping with Q&A today.
Hello everyone, my name is Sutikshna Veeravalli. I am, along with Sachin, one of the education and peer support leads today at CareSpaces, and today I'll be helping on back end.
Hello, my name is Aishwarya Chandrasekhar. I'm the illustrator and interactive designer at CareSpaces. I, along with Sutikshna, will be managing the tech backend.
Hi everyone, I'm Ratipriya Suresh. I'm head of design and lead UX UI designer at CareSpaces. I'll be handling post-session summaries today. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Janani Ramesh. I'm co-founder and creative head of CareSpaces. Today I'll be in charge of general event management and logistics.
Hi, I'm Sneha Mahesh, an arts management intern at SNS Arts Development Consultancy.
Thank you, everyone. Now we'll be moving on to introducing our panelists, starting with Ananta. Ananta R. Krishnan is the grandson and disciple of Mridangam maestro Vidwan Sri Palgat R. Raghu. Ananta initially learned Mridangam from his uncle, Sri R. Ramkumar. He also studies tabla with Ustad Zakir Hussain. He holds a Bachelor's of Arts from Dartmouth College and a Master's of Fine Arts from Mills College, California. He currently serves on the faculty of KM Music Conservatory in Chennai. In 2020, he founded Mridanga Mela, a festival property dedicated to human gathering fueled by the stories from the Mridangam. Welcome, Ananta.
Hello. Born and raised in San Jose, California, Rohit Jairam is a vocalist, composer, and educator known for his soulful voice, speed, precision, and infectious energy. Originally trained in Carnatic music under his mother and guru, Asha Ramesh, Rohit never saw himself as a career musician until very late in his high school career, wherein he attended a 6-day Berklee College of Music summer program. There, he fell in love with the culture and decided to commit to Berklee over a career in medicine at UCLA. While attending Berklee, Rohit stumbled upon the Indian ensemble class, which he subsequently joined and continued throughout his degree. He graduated in 3 years with a degree in music therapy and spent time as a clinical music therapist before being called back to Berklee as the assistant manager of Berklee India Exchange. Rohit is currently an in-house vocalist with the Berklee Indian Ensemble and works in the world of crossover music, collaborating with musicians in areas as diverse as jazz, pop, Arabic music, metal, gnawa, folk, electronica, and more. He has shared the stage with internationally acclaimed artists such as A.R. Rahman, Zakir Hussain, John McLaughlin, Tigran Hamasyan, Shreya Ghoshal, and Shankar Mahadevan. Please welcome Rohit.
Sorry about that, everyone. Had a little bit of a tech hiccup. Next, we'll be introducing Nadi. Nadi Tekek is the artistic director of Nava Dance Theater, a Bharatanatyam dance company based in San Francisco. While and after completing her PhD in bioengineering from Rice University, Nadi found models of viable careers in dance performance in both London and Chennai. Inspired by these artists, Nadi, along with several fellow dancers, started Nava Dance Theater with the goal of making sure dancers were paid for their work. Nadi uses Bharatanatyam performance and discourse to navigate the complicated intersection of racism, feminism, and identity politics in the South Asian diaspora. Some of her recent works explore unheard refugee voices of the 1947 British India partition, xenophobia, and the hyphenated American experience, her personal response to the Me Too movement, and in intergenerational narratives through Bharatanatyam and modern dance. She has learned from Guru Srimati Sundara Swaminathan of the Kala Vandana Dance Company, Srimati Padmini Chari of the Nritya School of Dance, and since 2012 has been learning from Guru Sri A. Lakshmanaswamy from the Nritya Lakshana Dance School of Chennai. Welcome, Nadi.
Shreya Nagarajan Singh is an arts development consultant based out of Chennai, India. She's a trained Bharatanatyam dancer with a background in arts management. Shreya was selected for the prestigious Asia Pacific Leadership Program at the East-West Center, Hawaii, and has traveled extensively around Southeast Asia doing research on dance and dance practice. Shreya has also worked extensively as an arts development consultant to build brand and audience through outreach events in Chennai for various clients. Shreya completed her master's on a Fulbright scholarship in arts management at Columbia College Chicago's Department of Business and Entrepreneurship. In 2017, Shreya launched SNS Arts Development Consultancy, which provides strategic guidance, artists management, fundraising, sponsorship, operational, and revenue management strategies for artists and art companies. She feels that there's a pressing need for arts management consulting in fields that have traditionally not been viewed as an industry. Please welcome Shreya Nagarajan Singh.
And last but not least, we'll be introducing Ashwath. Ashwath Narayanan is a student of Carnatic music and hails from Chennai. He has trained under veteran musicians Sangeeta Kalanidhi, Balgat K.V. Narayanaswamy, and Srimati Padma Narayanaswamy. As one of the torchbearers of the KVN Bani, Ashwath's music is known for its chaste classicalism, pitch perfection, clean pronunciation, and vocal dynamics. He regularly performs Carnatic music concerts all over India and has toured several countries, performing along with some top-class artists. Ashwath also holds a Bachelor's of Engineering in Biotechnology and works for an IT startup as a consultant for digital analytics. His professional aim is to satisfy multiple interests, hence his dual career. Welcome, Ashwath.
Thank you to everyone who's joining us today, and thank you to all of our team members for the back-end help. We acknowledge the hereditary artists throughout India and recognize the importance of their contributions to the art forms represented on this panel today. We pay our respects to their community, past, present, and emerging.
This discussion features voices from creative Indian performing arts, and we understand the privilege that comes with access and proximity to these art forms. Although we may come from different ecosystems, this is a safe space. So we are all approaching this conversation with mutual respect, empathy, and active listening, and believe anyone and everyone in this space is equal, regardless of age, gender, caste, or experience. We request both speakers and listeners to do the same. With that, we'll begin today's discussion. Our guided discussion today will be split into 6 sections. In the first part, we'll be exploring each of our panelists' paths towards the performing arts. From there, we'll explore the varied payment structures they face and explore some pain points in the current structure of how compensation and art is valued in our community. As a part of this, we'll explore the US performance tour industry, as well as how the performance industry in India works, and then move towards future solutions to ensure apt payment for all stakeholders in this community. Before we start, I would like to make a distinction here. We have, as I said, artists from very diverse backgrounds, and all of them are professional artists. While some of them choose to pursue this full-time, others pursue a dual career. We've often heard the words part-time versus full-time musician. We won't be using those terms today because we do have many artists who pursue this as a dual career. And with that said, when we talk about professionalism at CareSpaces and SNS, what we refer to are certain tenets such as respect, accountability, transparency, and just a mutual adoration for the art form. With that, we'll actually begin today's discussion. We'll begin with Nadi and Rohit. Both of you come from rather formalized environments of performance, as both of you are affiliated with organizations and institutions, respectively. Nadi is part of Nava Dance, and Rohit comes from the Berklee College of Music. So can you both maybe take a moment and briefly talk about how you came to taking up arts as a profession? Because both of you have very different backgrounds and perhaps didn't always see yourselves as professional musicians or dancers. We can start with you, Nadi.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Neha. Thanks, Gahan. Thanks, the whole team. Yes, and the question is how we got here?
Yeah, how you decided to choose to pursue dance full time.
Yeah, no, it was definitely a culmination of a lot of different things that were happening in my life at the time. Grew up dancing in the Bay Area. Bay Area dance scene is pretty spectacular, I would say. Everyone dances. And I think I even met Rohit once at an Arangejam rehearsal, like little Rohit in the back. I also was little at the time. So, I mean, I think, yeah. So the community is like very connected in so many ways. Which I loved growing up, and I loved our ensemble shows that my teacher, Sundar Auntie, would put on. It was always really fun. My best friends were dancers, and it was really like a huge part of how I grew up in the US. But having said that, given my background, like my parents are Malayali, I grew up Christian. I mean, we didn't really have access or too much interest in dance and Carnatic music. It was just something that everyone did. And okay, Nadi also, that kind of feeling. And loved it, but was really only exposed to my school and like similar schools, and didn't really have a sense of the touring industry and artists who came through the US, which I think they were certainly coming during the time that I was learning. But when I went to Houston and learned with Padmini Auntie, she actually exposed me to sort of the touring industry and brought me to a lot of concerts. I saw Rama Vaidyanathan perform. We went to Chennai together, saw tons of amazing artists. And this is like, I'm 20 something at that point. And I was shocked at the fact that there were people honestly dancing for a living. I just didn't know. And this was before YouTube. So we also didn't really have access the way we have access now in terms of what we see. And I was certainly blown away. And I knew that it had to be a bigger part of my life. And once I had my first daughter, I realized I couldn't be I personally couldn't pull off being a full-time engineer, full-time dancer, and a full-time mom. And I felt like one thing had to give. And that was the engineering path. So I think that was sort of the impetus for making that decision, like going all in on dance and obviously having to go all in on my child. I have to be there. Yeah. So that was my beginning, I would say.
Yeah, and Rohit, if you want to also maybe help us understand how you got situated as pursuing this professionally.
Yeah, absolutely. As Nadi mentioned, I think we both come from fairly similar backgrounds. Growing up in the Bay Area, which is definitely chock full of really, really strong artists. And as Gohan mentioned earlier, actually, I never really considered music as a career. I was pretty set on studying medicine, I think. I don't know, by process of elimination. And then a family friend who I met at an event said, "Oh, have you thought about doing music full time?" And I said, "Oh, I mean, I love music." And he's like, "No, have you thought about it like in a concrete way as a career?" And I said, "Oh, not really." And he suggested Berkeley to me, and within the course of a few months, I'd pretty much settled on that as where I was going to go. But I went to Berkeley to study music therapy, so I still sort of, in some way, held on to what I perceived as stability. And then, fast forward through my time at Berkeley, I ended up playing a lot with the Berkeley Indian Ensemble right around the time that it was starting to become really popular. And less than a year after graduating, I'm so grateful. Berkeley called me and offered me a position to come work with Berkeley India Exchange, which is the institute sort of built around the Indian Ensemble. And I've been there now for 5 years. Haven't had much chance to do music therapy, but I'm getting to play a whole lot with the Indian Ensemble, as well as manage the band a little bit and sort of get some exposure to the production side of things. So I'm sort of covering both ends of the spectrum a little bit.
Awesome. So yeah, moving on now to Ananta and Ashwat, who have both robust careers as solo and ensemble artists, both coming from musical families and backgrounds. However, both of you also have a full-time job outside of performance. Ananta is part of the KM Conservatory, and Ashwat is a full-time IT professional. And I was just wondering if you could speak to kind of that moment when you realized that you had this, arts as your career, either one of or all of your careers. And Ananta, if you could go first.
Okay. First of all, happy to be here. And it's great to get to know all of your stories.
Happy to have you.
So I think it was very clear for me that I love to play the mridangam from my childhood. And a lot of that probably has to do with the family I come from, and probably the genetics and, all the good stuff that was kind of just handed down by blood, to make it very succinct. And so I had no choice but to fall in love with this instrument, connect to its spirit, and all fine and well. When it comes to actually being a career, you have to make a choice. And so being brought up in the US, being educated in that whole system, I think it became very clear to me that the anxiety that I faced of, trying to, get a job or, do something else was much worse than what I would feel as an excitement for getting on stage. And the more and more I kind of started to understand what that is, things moved in a kind of place where I had to end up in India. Some of it had to do with a little bit of sadness that my grandfather passed away. And so, basically to show you, all of these instruments that in the room that I'm sitting here were basically bequeathed to me. And in my family, they're like spirits that we've grown up with. They are people. And so I kind of came to just be a caretaker of them. And then while I was here, I started playing, and soon enough, that's what I was doing, and haven't looked back since. So that's the most real answer I can give you. Of course, if you asked me what I wanted to be when I was young, I would have probably said something very different. Maybe said tennis or something like that. But yeah, I'm happy that that happened the way it does. So.
Yeah, I mean, Nadi just commented as well. It's just amazing story, and love to get that perspective from you. And similarly, I wanted to ask Ashwat the same question. When did you realize, this is it? This is what we want to do. This is what I want to do.
Yeah, a very similar story to Ananta, actually. I don't remember a time when I didn't sing or something. I've always, one, like singing, I don't remember a time when I didn't sing one. On the other side, being a part of a family of musicians means that you have to sing. You don't have an option. And so that's how I was brought up. And how I was taught music was always in a very serious manner. It was, I never remember a time when I was taught, like, I could take things for granted or like just be playful about it, even when I was a child. So that's how things started. And I had started, giving kacheris while I was in school itself, but all small time here and there stuff. And then when I finished my college was when I had to make a decision as to whether what I'm going to do. First of all, the decision to do engineering was like from a dream that I had, I was going to become some biotechnologist and stuff like that. So, okay, I took up I took up biology in school and then further did with biotechnology in college. But then when I was in second or third year, I realized that I was not cut out for it at all. And I started doing multiple electives and other things which are outside my degree. But then when I finished college, I didn't have any pressure from family that I had to choose any one thing or the other or something like that. They were okay with me making those choices. So the only thing that I had in my mind was that my personality is such that I need to have multiple things that need to be happening at the same time. I can't focus on one thing and just be doing that. I need to have multiple things, not because I'm distracted or anything, but it's just that I need that change of things, change of space, change
You
of
need a
setting.
context switching.
Yeah, that needs to keep happening, and that's the nature of my personality. So keeping that in mind, I had like some real interest for data analytics at that point of time. That's why I thought, okay, I should take it up. I got a great offer with a good company in Bangalore at that point of time. And then I was like, okay, let's start doing it and then just see how things were and then see how we are able to juggle it. So that's how the decision really happened. Of course, there were also other reasons like financial reasons and then the general way in which the Carnatic music industry works and things like that were also contribution to that. But the major reason being I just needed things that were totally different from what each other. That's the reason why I had to take up that at that
Awesome.
point.
Yeah, so I mean, it's really interesting because all of our panelists up until now who are performing artists professionally, you all have such like diverse backgrounds, and even your like academic interests weren't solely in music either, right? So you're professionals in like the true sense that you have other interests going on, and you're still able to be some of the top artists in your field today. So I know personally that is extremely impressive, and I think that's also a message to people out there who are watching, like, you don't need to be limited by any like one single interest and only stick to that. But now I also want to get to Shreya, who is also by training a dancer herself. But Shreya, I'm wondering like how you came to take up arts management as a profession, because at least in the Carnatic and Bharatanatyam industries, it's relatively new. So why did you choose arts management, and why did you choose to set yourself up as a consultancy, and like what was the need of the hour to sort of have SNS come into this field? If you can expand upon that, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And this has been fascinating listening to all of your stories. So with SNS, and what I really want to do is, I honestly didn't really know what I want to do when I finished school. Just like Ashwath, I did physics, chemistry, maths, biology, and then I just had no clue what I was doing in my life. I was always attracted to the arts, and I've been dancing since I was 3 or 4. And I still continue to dance, but I don't perform. I just perform, for intimate gatherings. But at the end of the day, I knew that was not a sustainable option. And I've been brought up by a single mother, so I always sort of valued financial independence. It was very important to me, and I knew very early on because I was not going to get that from dance, and I didn't feel I was at that quality either that I could be that level of a dancer too. And so I think I started kind of confusing passion and profession, and the more I tried to make dance my profession, it became less satisfying to me. And I don't know, for me, the space was too toxic. So, but I wanted to be in the arts, and I knew that performing was not my strength. And I sort of explored. I did an arts management course at Dakshina Chitra. I went and did a leadership course at Hawaii. I traveled all around the world just trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I really figured out that I really like bringing people together, and I like working with various different artists from various different backgrounds. And that sort of led me to sort of build that idea of being in the arts, but not as an artist. And then I realized there's just so much of a need for it. And it always came down to funding in the arts, supporting the arts, building platforms in the arts, bringing different artists together, right? Which I felt was not being done enough. And I said, okay, how can I do this? And Fulbright helped me out with my second master's in arts management. And I just worked in the contemporary art field. I worked in the classical art field. I worked with, solo projects, with research, and it just sort of worked out. And then when I started SNS, of course, when I came back from my master's, I had really good job offers in the arts sector, at leadership level that I could have joined very easily. But I knew that the minute I did that I would immediately not be able to work with everyone. And I wanted to be in a position where anybody who needed help building their career in the arts, or helping understand how to make money in the arts, or how to build revenue systems in the arts, or business model in the arts, they won't have access to me if I was working for a certain company. So the idea of starting a consultancy is that I'm available to anybody from any background, from any community, from anywhere around the world. I'm available to them. And that's really why I started it as a consultancy. And that's what helps me get out of bed in the morning, honestly.
Yeah, that's absolutely fantastic. And I think that sort of lends its way to our next topic of discussion, sort of getting into payment structures for each and every one of you. Shreya, that's something that you just touched upon, how that's one of like the primary goals that you help your clients out with. It's extremely difficult to navigate in the arts, and I know our panelists have a lot to say about that.
Yeah, and great segue. So now that we've established where our panelists are currently situated professionally in the world, and what they do, we want to take this time to go and dive deep into the various payment structures that each of our panelists are interacting with, and revenue streams that they might have. So I wanted to begin with Rohit specifically, as he sheds light into how having the backing of the Indian ensemble helps him, and then also what he sets as individual boundaries for himself so that he's, getting paid enough to sustain a living.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about sort of how the Indian ensemble is sort of set up. I think that'll help. So the Indian ensemble is actually still a course at Berklee College of Music. So any given student at the college who pays tuition can audition and take it for 1 credit, depending on the number of rehearsals that you attend per week. And that's really how it began. Annette Phillip, who founded the ensemble, she was basically given a blank slate to say, do whatever you want. And she said, well, there's no space currently for Indian music to just experiment really at Berklee. So she started this group that was just a few vocalists. There was no band. It was roommates who were keyboard players or friends who were percussionists. And it sort of snowballed from there as more and more students from around the world joined. And then in 2014, I think I was probably in my second year at Berklee, we were able to do a tribute concert as well as an honorary doctorate presentation for A.R. Rahman. And that concert ended up getting a lot of traction on the internet, which is always a mystery. And a couple of our videos went really viral, which is very exciting, especially for us as students at the time who had basically gotten no FaceTime on the internet, other than Neopets or Farmville or whatever we were doing. It was our first real exposure to being recognized as artists. And I think that Jia Jale video was really that first one where it was just, hitting 1 million almost a day for a couple of weeks. And that was really exciting. And starting from there on, people started to sort of look at it as a band, I would say maybe akin to like Pen Masala, the sort of high level college band, except we obviously had a rhythm section. We worked with orchestras and things at the college. So it was a little different from that a cappella setup. Which I think most Indian Americans are familiar with in the college circuit. And so we started to get called for shows. And at first it was, okay, who's free on a Friday evening or a Saturday evening? Okay, you have a final next week. Okay, don't do the show, and it was very organic. And it was all just students just making it work in their free time. And then around, I think maybe 2016, when I ended up back at Berkeley, we were starting to get pulled in two different directions where, it was all students, but there was now like a robust group of alumni who had left Berkeley, but who were very much part of like the ensemble family. So we would sometimes call on them for external shows when we couldn't take students. And, we played at the Ganesh Utsava Festival in Bangalore that year. And really it started to become like, okay, this group might actually tour, sections of the year. And we needed to sort of figure out, okay, how do we handle this? If this is a professional band, we need to sort of restructure it. So where we're sort of at now is that we have a pro band version, which is the Berkeley Indian Ensemble. And that's 11 people at its core. And then, we'll bring on maybe a string quartet if we can swing it or that kind of thing. And we really try to make sure that, the students who go through the program are at Berkeley because they want to be professionals in the music industry in some way or the other. And so we want them to go out into the world knowing that you can get, one, you can sustain a career and that you will get fairly compensated for work that you do. So, everyone in the band gets paid. And given that it's, we're all sort of handling an individual role, we all actually split the payments evenly. And then the difficult part is with the students, where Berkeley is, I think, 40 or so % international at this point. So a lot of our students are international students. There's actually, I'm the only American in the professional touring outfit, and there's mostly international students in our programs, and they can't get paid in the United States for work unless it's through the college. So there's a lot of really complex things that we're still trying to iron out. But in the event that a student does end up playing with us, we always, maybe sometimes it's a little more jugaad than other situations, but we always try to get students paid because, again, we want them to go out knowing their worth when they go out into the world. So that's sort of how we've structured it, and we're trying our best to make it cleaner and better with every show that we do.
Awesome. Yeah, and now you've talked about the Indian Ensemble and its payment structures. So basically, to summarize, it's a band now. It's gone through a process to get there, but it's a band now. There's a pro band, and then there's a student band that does it mostly for exposure. This pro band, whatever they get, they split the pot evenly, and that's sort of what you get, and you negotiate your price and things. Now, I want to talk briefly about your individual performances. So, number, like, what kinds of stuff do you do, and then how do you ensure that you have like a good revenue stream from that?
Yeah, I think I grew up learning Carnatic music from my mom, who is in this house, and I think all kids who learn Carnatic music, when you're deep in it, you have this desire to be a full-time Carnatic musician. I don't know if that's true, but it was definitely true for me. But I think somewhat along the lines of what Shreya was saying earlier, I was realizing, especially being in the Bay, where every single I joke, you throw a rock in a mall and you'll hit like an incredible Carnatic musician or Bharatanatyam dancer or something, and so I think I was getting to the point where I was working with a lot of people from other traditions, and I was doing less and less of just Carnatic stuff, and I was realizing that I don't consider myself necessarily the best person to be a Carnatic musician. I would rather listen to someone else do a kachari than listen to myself do one. So I've sort of stepped away from doing that over the last, maybe like 7-8 years. And I do mostly, we'll call it crossover type things, working with people from other traditions, and spending a lot of time right now, especially sort of exploring like modal jazz and miles and things like that, and really trying to learn sort of that whole realm of music. So I'm doing, and I do the occasional, let's call it contemporary Indian performance, which is like maybe Bollywood songs and things like that, which are often fun. So for those typically charge. I think the Indian Ensemble was a good sort of jumpstart for me in that way. I, like most musicians, think, oh, I love doing this, and I want to do it because I love it. But the exposure that the Indian Ensemble gave me sort of made me realize that I need to sort of value my time more.
Exactly.
And start charging for these things, and also so as to not, indirectly undervalue the Indian ensemble. So it was a combination of all those factors, and I do my best now, barring certain situations where, if it's for a nonprofit that I really support, or for a friend, I'll always try to charge for things, just for my own time.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much for saying that. And we'll talk more about that how it affects, the economy overall and things like that in a later section, which is a great thing that you touched upon. And now I want to talk to Nadi. So how does Nava work? Where's the money coming from? How does the money get to individuals within the company? And then also, where does the money come from for you putting on these shows? Because there's a fair bit of investment that you need to do in order to like get the theater and put together the people and all this other stuff. So what goes where essentially.
Yeah. It's interesting. So I mean, as many dancers or even musicians, anyone who's self-produced anything knows that it takes a lot of money to do this, like whether it's booking a studio, like a recording studio, or booking a theater and rehearsal space. And so even without paying anyone, which we don't do, but without paying anyone, there's a huge amount of money that you need, sort of minimally. And then if you need your own music, and it's sort of this rabbit hole of putting money in and never seeing any kind of revenue, but we decided we didn't want to do that. And so one of the things that we were able to do as a company, and this is me and two founders in the beginning and a company of dancers, was that we wanted to make work together. We grew up doing ensemble productions. We loved it, and we loved working with each other. And so we wanted to keep doing that. So this was sort of naive of us to think that it would be easy and we could just do this. But it was a really, it was an endeavor that we went on it together. And given my PhD background and a lot of the papers and grants and everything, that world that I was in, like my immediate, like my first resource that I thought of was grants. And so that's sort of how we entered the scene. And I was like, what grants are there available? And actually, as a new company, there aren't that many grants available. And so it really took a lot of applications to get to the one that really supported our very first work, the Cloud Messenger. And with that, which was a residency, it included the theater, it included studio space and a stipend, but still not able to cover all the costs. But using that grant, we were able to leverage more funding to actually support the artists, and everyone was paid, dancers and musicians. And I think moving forward, it was, I mean, I didn't know, like at that time, dancers didn't get paid, but that wasn't a thing. I don't want to make it sound like a bad thing. It just, that was the nature of the industry, right? And unless you were someone coming from India or you were on tour or doing workshops, like we didn't have an industry, so to speak. Like I'm generalizing, but you dance with your teacher, which is fun, and you perform in tons of venues and you perform a lot, but the idea of payment was not like a very common conversation. And so I actually had to, so one of the co-founders, Arun, who some of you know, Arun Matai, like he works in a contemporary Indian dance company, Blue 13. So he was the one that sort of was like, these are the structures, like this is, and it seemed kind of obvious, like we put this many hours, minimum wage is this, so can't pay less than that, like it sort of helped me break it down in my mind. And I think at that point we made a decision that we could make a work every year and really struggle and maybe not pay dancers and just make a new piece every year. And that's fine, people can do that. But as a company, we made the decision that we would go project to project, that we would raise the funds, then do the project. And this is, of course, not every scenario. And like, of course, there are a few instances in the beginning where we didn't have paid performances, but I still would find the money to pay the dancers something. So it was sort of something that I decided to do. And now, like 8 years in, I'm pretty adamant about finding the funds to pay for dancers' rehearsal time. So that's generally, I don't know
Awesome.
if I...
Yeah. So just to clarify, so you say you got some money from grants, but then there's and this is to fund projects essentially. Like you're using this not necessarily to pay people, because I don't think there's like a very small subset of approved uses for grants that you need to apply, right? Whether it's federal or state grants. I'm wondering what percentage of the grant money is going towards, putting food on the table for dancers versus like the gig money that you get for these gigs after you set up everything and do the initial work of setting up the theater and all this other stuff for ticketing and things.
Yeah. So
especially because also I think operational grants are so difficult to get, right, Nadi?
Yeah, we don't get them. I mean, that doesn't exist here. Like maybe there are, but only after COVID. Everyone's like, this is now general operating funds. I'm like, we really needed this like 10 years ago. But no, they are project to project. So the grants, I mean, I don't want to get too nitty gritty, but you can divide it into some of the funds that support the studio, some of the funds that support production, and most of the funds which support artist fees. And in fact, you don't apply for a grant if you don't plan to include artist fees, because artists are the reviewers. And if they see that you're paying musicians more, or and they're going to be like, what's the story here? You're not paying yourself, although I didn't pay myself for a long time, but that's a different story. And it like you start realizing, like, I remember one of my first grants I applied for, I didn't pay myself. I was like, oh, no, don't worry. The money is all going to the theater. And they wrote back, you're not getting this grant. Like, what the heck? And the people were really nice. They're like, you need to pay everyone equally, yourself included. And it was sort of like mind blowing to even hear that from a reviewer. And that's the advice I've been giving other dancers and musicians too. When they're like, what about grants? I'm like, sure you pay yourself in there.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. I mean, at least in the context of academics, I'm speaking from personal experience, reviewers are always your enemies. And in this case, they're telling you something that actually is helpful. So that's good.
I mean, it's really interesting here because, like you said, we don't have a very like robust and built out arts economies, unfortunately. It's definitely getting there, and we're 10 steps ahead of where we were perhaps 10 years ago. But I mean, it's a little sad as well that you have like these external forces coming in and being like, why aren't you getting paid? Or we always have to sort of like seek external counsel, so to say, and go to other industries and be like, how do you guys do it? Let's bring that in, because it hasn't been really like ingrained or instilled in us that payment is like mandatory. And even like Rohit and Nadi, it sort of seems like both of you had to go out of your way to become comfortable with being like, I'm setting my rate, I'm setting my price for my company, for me as an individual. I'm going to make sure that like this is the bare minimum. I'm sort of like going out of your way to change the standards, right?
No, yes. And then with the gig, because I self-produce, fundraising is a huge part of my job and making sure everyone gets paid. But we do have gigs. Like I think Gohan was saying, like sometimes we have a piece, it's like a 10-minute thing for some event, and we get paid, and that goes, that there's some overhead that it like costume, dry cleaning, stuff like that, but like that money just goes to whoever's dancing the gig that day, and so but those are fewer and far between because of the inundation of dancers in our industry. So we do mostly rely on self-producing, I think, for a majority of our budget, I would say.
So this has been really interesting, sort of situating how both of you have run your ensembles and your dance company in the US. And now I kind of want to shift to how things are situated in India. And just to sort of level set here, we do live in like a global arts world, right? So it's sort of wrong to think of things disparately, like, oh, this is US and this is India, because, we have our musicians and dancers travel and synergize all the time. But there are specifics that sort of cultural and level set each sort of like microcosm and industry due to geographic location. So when we think about that, Shreya, I actually want to navigate towards you, because a lot of what you do is you interact with a whole set of like musicians and dancers, mostly in India, and you help them navigate that system specifically. And we really look towards like the Sabha system when we think about Chennai, right, which is where you're based. So, can you speak a little to how like the current performance structure is in India and Chennai specifically, how the Sabha system affects that, and maybe dive into like sort of the various outlets of traditional kacheris and dance performances, and some of those pain points that you yourself must have faced at some point, and now your clients face, and you help them navigate.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to clarify, I'm based out of Chennai, but we also have a presence, SNS also has a presence in Chicago and Bombay. And so we sort of, like you said, work in the global arts economy at some level. But speaking specifically with Chennai, I'm going to say that we're just talking specifically about the classical arts here, which is Carnatic music and Bharatanatyam, and exactly Chennai. So the Sabha structure basically is very active from like, let's say November to like maybe February. And then the rest of the year, not much happens in the Sabha construct. And that time, and the rest of the year, they have few performances here and there, but nothing in a structured manner, specifically like Margary. And for the younger artist, how it really works is if they get a chance, there are two things that happen. Either they, apply and they get a chance to perform, in which case there's usually never any payment associated with it. And if you come up to a certain mid-level of an artist, you do get paid at some point, but you really don't know how much you're going to get paid after the performance. I think there's like a uncomfortable exchange of an envelope where it has some money in it, and you really don't know what that is going to be or if you're even going to get it. And or of course, like we've seen from our own little Instagram and statistics that we put out, is that most people pay to get slots during Margary. And so I think we should beat about the bush and just address it upfront that people do pay to get a slot in the Sabha, hoping basically that over time they don't have to pay for a slot, and over time they build value and they're able to build an audience, etc., etc. So the Sabha sees value in them, and then the Sabha invites them to perform. But that is the key part, right? That transition of how do you do that, as well as for people who don't have the access to pay for slots year on year, how are they going to establish the value, and how are the people who are paying for slots killing the market for themselves and everyone else, right? So I think these are the few things we need to discuss about it. And of course, you're looking at like the higher level artists of the Sanjay Subramaniams of the world who are able to bring in audiences, right? So when the audience comes in, there's immediately a certain revenue for the Sabha. So the Sabha sees value in the artist. But the opposite side is the Sabhas also are not able to, in my opinion, raise enough sponsorship money to sustain themselves, right? And right now the revenue is not coming from ticketing for Sabhas. Of course, I'm generalizing here like crazy because we have so many different Sabhas. Let's remove Music Academy out of it and let's talk about the rest of them. The revenue is not coming necessarily from tickets, right? Unless you're the top 5 artists in the city. So they are relying on sponsorship. But what do sponsors want? Sponsors want a full auditorium. Sponsors want customers. Sponsors want visibility. So it's kind of like a catch-22 situation because you don't have the audiences. And because of that, you don't have the sponsors. And, it's like a vicious circle, right? And at the end of the day, the artist is one who has to pay for their classes, has to pay for the orchestra, has to pay for the slot, has to pay for their makeup, has to pay for their, costumes, of course. But Risha, at the end of the day, it's like, how are you going to be sustainable in this? And that's a question I get asked all the time. How do I be a sustainable artist? I said, first be an artist, then we'll think about being sustainable. That is the situation over here, right? Because sustainability takes time. You have to build yourself. You have to build your value. You have to build yourself as an artist and as a brand before you can talk about sustainability, right? So I don't even want to address that right here. So this is the rough, is that what you were asking me? Does that answer?
Yeah, that was perfect.
Yeah. What the construct it was?
Yeah,
but also
I
wanted
question.
to.
I actually have a sorry. Finish your point. Sorry, Shreya. Finish your point.
I had a little bit of scandalous point to say, but I was just going to say, Ashwath, and maybe this panel, I think, has basically backed that assumption. Is one, I don't think Sabhas are the future, because I really don't know the sustainability and how far. In the next 20 years, I don't know if the Sabhas are going to be as they are right now. I think they will be in a completely different format. And I think artists today need to start thinking into the future. So you need to start thinking like NFT, need to start thinking VR. Like we need to be at that level, right? We cannot be stuck in this framework. And younger artists today who are emerging and who are trying to break it in, don't try to break into that is what I understand. We need to kind of create new paths for ourselves and new revenue models for ourselves. Nobody's going to do it. We need to do this for us. And I mean, that's where my company comes in. That's where I come in. But I want to say, Ashwath, I don't know, maybe that's what you're going to ask, is I don't think today artists can only be artists. They need to have another profession to set them up for at least for the first 5 years of their career. And that is the tough part, right? How do you manage a job that is within the arts or not, and how do you be an artist at the same time and up your game and your level in your craft and also play this game in the arts world, right? And that is the challenging bit. But I really don't think, I tell all my clients, please go find yourself a job. Let's give us 5 years to figure this out and come up with a strategic plan on how you're going to build your career. You need revenue to then, because if you don't have revenue, you're not going to be the best artist you can be, because it's definitely going to be screwing with your mind for sure. Because I mean, like your bank balance is going to be weighing on your head, right, at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. So
Sorry,
my
Ashwat.
question was
Yes.
my question was a mix of a lot of points that you made and a lot of points that Nadi also made. In the context of being an artist in India, what are the I don't know of any Carnatic artist or a Bharatanatyam artist who actually makes a living out of funding and other things. So what are the avenues that we have in India that are actually, some kind of funding through a government agency or some private, organization that is into arts promotion? And I've not heard of anything in the context, at least the people that I know, the circles that I know. So are there any avenues like that at all? Was a question that I had for Shreya. Given that you work with so many artists, like in the context of classical as well as other art forms as well.
There are avenues, but they're not consistent avenues. You have to build them, right? And like I said, we don't have the grant system is not strong in India. So it's really about patronage. It's about supporting ourselves. And we all know, right? Most of the way artists sustain themselves is teaching. That is really their only consistent way of generating revenue, right? But are they able to generate as much from performance? I'm not sure. So that's where I think the system really is teaching. I mean, that's where they get the bread and butter comes from that. Everything else is extra. And of course, I forgot to mention, like Ananta and many other artists, it's this whole US touring, UK touring is what really brings them a lot of the revenue earning in foreign exchange, is how they, I think, create savings. Because I don't think artists can save in INR. You have to be playing the bigger game if you need to even think about saving and investment and things like that, right? Because at the end of the day, artists need to retire too. At some point, you can't be singing till you're 85, right? And playing the game. I mean, so that is also another way I reverse help artists with their careers. I said, okay, when do you want to stop? Let's think about when do you want to stop being an artist? And then let's work backwards. How much money do you want at that point? What kind of lifestyle do you want at that point? And then, but to answer your question, Ashwath, yeah, there is no one stream. There are many streams, but which, if you have a consultation with me, I will discuss with you.
Nice.
I love the shameless plug, honestly. Everyone, sign up for SNS Arts Development Consultants.
So I thank you, Shreya, for that. I think that was really helpful in setting the stage for what I'm going to talk to, who I'm going to talk to next. So I'm actually going to talk to Ananta and Ashwath about this because they've found ways, despite this admittedly flawed system, to navigate these for themselves, to make sure that they are both satisfied professionally, musically, creative. So, Ananta, can you please explain to us, given the payment structures that exist within the Sabha structure, how you sustain yourself financially, and then also how you sustain yourself, like what is the payment structure for you? Like what constitutes your payment?
So there's a couple of things that have to address before I say this entirely. One is when I first started in Chennai and I was performing, it became very clear to me there's two ways of doing this. One is I'm anybody, but I'm cheaper. Or the other is I'm going to charge a lot of money, but then you get more than what you pay for.
It's the Costco wholesale versus the luxury store.
Yeah, and that's something that immediately kind of, I don't know, I would say made sense to me, or like I didn't really want to play the volume game. I didn't really want to play 25, 30 concerts, or say I'm gonna do 50 concerts in December or something like that. And so the difference between I don't know, being like a wandering generality versus something that's like a desired specific was something that I had to kind of work at a little bit. So over some time, I'm happy to say that the people I get to perform with, they don't want a mridangist. They don't want a guy with a beard. They want Ananta. And so the money that I ask them for makes sense to them, right? And so they also know that I'm not doing anything for glory, or I'm not doing it for a kind of competitive revenge that, this person did it. I want we're coming from a generous place, and that is really the only motivating thing for me to do in taking on opportunities. Is I have something to share, but being generous doesn't mean lowering my price. Doesn't mean doing something for free. It means that I want to give you something that I'm very good at, and that's taken time, that's taken practice. It continues to get more difficult as I age, but I love it, so I'll do it. And so when that empathy is there between the people who invite you to play and, in my case, my smallest viable audience. So when my name, is put on some, invitation or some, promotion, I'm not saying there's many people, but there is a small group of people who will come to see me. And more people see that, the more and more I'm allowed to say, this is what I think I deserve. And there is a hypothetical value to an artist, and there's a realistic value to an artist. And when there is a place where enough people can understand that this Venn diagram has a meeting point, you get what you want. And in my case, I had to work at it a little bit. And, like I've, I think I'm not alone in saying it, but I'm happy to send work to my competition because I don't want to be doing anything other than what I want to be doing. And so in that context, I've not passed out, but passed on many concerts to, people who might be cheaper, who might be just better at it than what I am at for that particular opportunity. And so I'm happy to do that because I don't want to be fighting myself to get through an event because I don't feel important to myself to be there.
Yeah.
And so in those things, the people I perform with, they know that about me now, that, I think I don't want to be the best at anything. I just want to be the best at me. And so what they're actually getting is me. And so if they like it, they, always like it. If they don't like it, then that's fine. Someone else can do that. And the one thing about, fortunately, which has gone in my, gone well for me, is that I still want to be friends with somebody even if I'm not playing music with them. Right? I want to say, I want to jam my finger, or God forbid, I can't play the mridangam, but let's go out and have dinner, or let's go out and have a good time. And so if I'm allowed to engage with people on that level, in addition to my music, I find that the artistic endeavor is much more meaningful. So the thing I hate being is kind of like a hired sniper, to be like, this guy comes and, he does his thing and here's a ton of money. And then, we don't want to hear from him till the next time we need to call him. That's not what I want to do. So in that regard, I've been lucky that the people I perform with have that empathy and I have it for them. And I also think that in some context, we spoke a little bit about sponsorships and things like that. I think if there is a way that ticketing can kind of creep in as a kind of unanimous way of understanding the value of the art, that's a good thing. Because sponsorship is also this kind of, I don't know how many of you study economics, but it's this invisible hand of Adam Smith kind of thing that it comes in and it, changes the reality of the situation.
Yep.
And while sponsorship is a great thing, a lot of times you get this very inflated feeling of what something is worth because some company,
the invisible hand has a lot bigger of a thumb than it does a pinky. So,
or it has 50 fingers. I don't know.
There you go. Yeah.
I'd love for that thing to play mridangam, but thankfully it doesn't.
Pranita, can I ask you a question? When in your career did you start having the power to negotiate?
I don't know if it's a certain point in my career, but I never, and maybe that's kind of the thing that helped me coming from the US, is that I thought it made sense to know what I'm going to be paid for the time that I'm going to engage with somebody.
That's a
And it
great
doesn't,
segue. Actually, I was wondering, how do you put anything in writing whenever you accept these things to make sure that, what you agree upon beforehand it matches up with what you're getting afterwards?
yeah,
Is there?
yeah. I mean, it's again, a lot of the best art comes from the trust that many people just know you for, and kind of the brand that you've now become. It's not something that's just a name. It's who shows up
Hmm.
and what are the values that they come with, right? And so in the beginning, it seemed odd to say, what is it that I can expect for this? And then once or twice that becomes normal. The people you perform with, or when you're inviting other people to play with, you have the ability to empower their anxiety or reduce their anxiety by saying, hey, this is what I can do. And
Yeah.
there's no it's not emotional. It's either I'm happy to do it, or maybe next time. Again, we need to kind of approach this with uh, a very, very pragmatic sense that it is something that
Awesome.
I offer. And, if it doesn't fit my bill this time, let's try it again. It doesn't mean that, I'm going to, have a voodoo of you in my house or something. And that's sometimes the kind of friendship that I've had to pass also. I'll be very frank with that. There are
Yeah.
people who I've had to say, look, I am going to say this to you, and if you feel like our friendship is going to suffer because of it, that's fine. At least we know that. But I don't think we should go. I don't want to go on too long about it. But in answering your question, Shreya, I think I don't know when exactly it happened, but you can sense that you have a certain leverage. Any artist would know that for themselves. In the moment, and like I said, I am not interested in playing for 1 million people. I want to play for X number of people who, no matter what I do, are there with me. And the moment I knew that I have that, then I started to negotiate.
Awesome. Awesome. So thank you, Ananta. That was very insightful. And I think it's important for people to hear. It's not something that's often talked about, and I think it's valuable that you are. And now I want to draw a contrast between Rohit, who talked earlier, and Ashwat, because so Rohit has said, for the past 7, 8 years, he's moved away from Carnatic performances as a source of income. And I want to talk next to somebody who has taken this sort of as the only source of musical income. So Ashwat, if you could give some context as to what your essentially finances look like. What is it? Two revenue streams, multiple. How are you handling it? All that together, and then maybe a little bit of the why as well. We'll get to more of the why later, but for now, let's focus on the what.
Yeah, pretty much two revenue streams, and when the revenue stream that comes from music is only the concert revenue that comes. I don't I have like probably 1 or 2 students, and even to them I don't teach for money. Uh, so I don't have a revenue stream coming through teaching or anything else. I just it's only the concert money that comes in, and of course my IT job pays me monthly something. So those are the revenue streams that are coming in generally, and yeah, it's pretty much that. Yeah.
Awesome,
So
awesome.
also, Ashwat, I wanted to then go, like sort of dive into that, um, because you do have this like dual revenue stream. Do you think you would be able to be as maybe as selective about the performance opportunities that you take if you didn't have what I'm going to call sort of like a safety blanket of your second revenue stream? Does that sort of factor into the opportunities you say yes to?
Absolutely, absolutely. Two things that I keep in mind while accepting or not accepting. So one is um, uh, there is a certain comfort that I have, financially at least, that comes through, having a job that gives you regular payments, right? So as part of that, I'm not too, I don't feel too compelled to accept, every opportunity that comes through on one side. And on the other side, I'm also cautious of the fact of where I stand today in terms of my, my ability to negotiate, or my, like, who are my peers, and like what is the going current rates. All these things are also in my mind when I accept or not accept a concert. So I don't want to kind of undersell myself just because I know that, that probably that X amount, that's the difference, doesn't matter to me much, but the opportunity does. I don't want to do that because I think that's detrimental to my competitors at some level. And I think that's also not a good or a healthy trend to do. So these are the two things that go in my mind, at least while I say yes or no to an opportunity in that sense.
Awesome.
You actually
Yeah.
bring up a great point. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I mean, what you just said, I really want to highlight, and we'll sort of get into this a little more. Guhan alluded to this earlier. This idea of that you might not be you might not be financially bound to the payment from a performance, but you don't accept a lower going rate just because that's the case. And that's really important here, because when we talk about people who do this full time versus dual career, that's often the question, right? Oh, because I'm doing this dual career, I can just I can take a lower going rate, right? I shouldn't feel greedy or anything. But that's not the case, because when you think about it in like a market economy, if you're naturally deflating the rate if you're not accepting the going rate, right? So
Correct.
it is, like you said, it's detrimental to your colleagues and your so-called competitors. And that's a really great point that you made.
Yeah, I think it's illegal, right? I don't know. Economists here can say it's illegal to do predatory pricing, right? If you're in the market and you just because you can afford to sell your product at like 10x lesser, doing it is, I think, illegal. So yeah, that's also
Yeah.
something that.
Does that mean that doesn't happen in our industry? I'll leave that as a moot point, but I think we all know the answer.
So I
Ashwin,
actually
do you
want to
think
touch
in
on.
your future, sorry, Ashwin,
No,
do you think in the future you will stop stop the IT job and just focus only on this? Not focus, but do you think that shift will ever happen?
Depends. So it really depends on how the industry takes shape and where I am able to find myself. And if the place that I find for myself is at a place where at least see I can be very frank about it. The only reason I have two reasons why I have the IT job in hand: one, I need distractions; two, financial stability. Right. So if the financial stability can come from music, then my other distractions can be anything else. I don't need to really work for something, right? So that being the case, if the industry takes a turn where I'm able to really find a place for myself, that will like kind of give me that stability. Why not? More than happy.
that's great. That's great to know. The other two things that I want to tie in are one thing that Ananta brought up, which is the concept of ticketing, and then I also want to bring up Chennai versus elsewhere in India. So when you go from a non-ticketed to a ticketed concert for yourself, what are the gains in what you see in terms of revenue? Like in terms of a multiplicative factor, like is it 5x? Is it 10x? Like what is that like?
Minimum 5 to 10x is like a minimum, but
Wow.
that's like, yeah, but that also comes with like n number of disclaimers though, right?
Right.
Like because the whole ball game is different when you move from a non-ticketed slot to a ticketed performance, because the moment you say ticketed, it all depends on like the crowd that you're able to pull and how many people are actually willing to pay and come for a performance, especially at a time where free performances are in vogue and things like that. So but yeah, the from a payment perspective, 100%, I think 10x is probably minimum. I don't know,
Wow.
like Ananta, others can definitely comment on it. This is my take on it though.
Well, I'd say it also in a perspective of what it means for that performance. And I've noticed, being a part of the same concert with other artists, or even the same artist, where a concert was ticketed, when it was free. And in some contexts, I wouldn't say it's all, the investment of the audience is also very different. When you see somebody who comes and who's paid for something that they truly wanted to see and be a part of that cumulative experience, there is something that's a takeaway, which is also an intangible kind of value, versus someone who says, oh, it's free, and that's fine. but then the investment of the audience into your art is also different. And so that's also one thing which I don't know what graph it plots on, but it's a feeling, and it's something that also needs to be understood by Indian American or Indian audiences, as well as Indian and Indian American artists.
Absolutely.
Is that if you can create a hygiene of saying that, my audience, again, who is your smallest viable audience who will pay to see you? And if we know exactly who that is, a good conversation can be started about how do we value this together.
Yeah,
I actually wanted to jump in there, and I have a really quick question. So how do we sort of balance this? This is to everyone, like panelists, how do we balance that with this culture of temple concerts, like kacheris that take place and dance performances that take place in temples? It's very common throughout India, and actually even in the US, a lot of our performance venues are halls at temples, right? And some of those are not ticketed. And actually, for the most part, I would say when it's associated with like an informal temple hall, it's not ticketed. So you have this like in and out crowd that comes in, and that's also what you see at a temple, right? So it's a really interesting sort of performance format to be sandwiched into this developing like formalized arts economy as well, right? So I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Can I go first, or?
Yeah, of course.
Or, well, I wouldn't say the temple concert is where we need to fix it. Temple concerts can happen. Artists get paid for temple concerts, and that's fine. But are there other concerts that are free that don't need to be free? Right? So the temple concert has a very different kind of, happiness quotient, which is part money, which is part, this part, the feeling, the vibe, the audience, I don't know. And of course, I understand that in the US, a lot of concert halls are in temples, and it's, maybe weird to charge for a temple concert. But I think that's a short-term problem. The long-term problem is that temple concerts can also be ticketed, provided then the venue is good, provided then the experience is good, provided then, it's not, something where it feels odd to want to desire that by paying money. So it's a two-way thing. I would say that if an artist is doing a certain amount of temple concerts, which are free, and they enjoy doing that, that's fine. But is there another place which also is kind of being plagued by free concerts that could slowly start being ticketed? And if there is an overlap where that can also become the temple concerts, then that's fine. I don't think it's a moralistic issue. I think it's a value issue of how do you make the temple concert interesting enough to be desired.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
I agree with Ananta. Actually, temple concerts are probably the least of our problems because they really don't. Different artists do temple concerts for different reasons, right? So it's a very subjective situation, and I don't think they really count in the context of an artist creating value for themselves or something like that. Right? What really matters are the ones where there is a facility and the artist being presented in a certain certain fashion and things like that. Those are the places where it really counts, is what I also think.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much. And the final thing I wanted to touch on is, we talked about the economy specifically within Chennai and the Sabha system. And I wanted to touch upon what happens when you leave Chennai, go elsewhere in India. Is the payment generally better, generally worse? And because there's sort of a notion that, this is the only place that you can perform, but that's not the case, right? You can perform elsewhere in India. And I just wanted to get your 2 cents on that.
Can I go?
Yeah.
So generally, the one of the privileges, I should say, of being an artist from Chennai is that you're already thought to be some great artist, and you're already branded as, especially in the context of Carnatic music, at least, right? So when you go to other states in India, or even go outside India and perform, this whole how do I put it? Whole notion of you being a Chennai artist gives you some kind of a branding for no reason. It really doesn't. I don't know why that's given, but that happens. So if you're a Chennai artist, you automatically have some level of negotiating power. And in my experience at least, the general trend of the payments that have happened for concerts outside of Chennai have been much better than what happens in Chennai. And there's actually a budget for travel, accommodation, whatever, blah blah blah. If you're there have been cases where rehearsal budgets have been there, things like that. Of course, in the context of what kind of performance you're doing. But I generally find this is the general trend that I found, at least in my experience.
I could be wrong, but tell me, Ananta and Ashok, because I've negotiated for clients. I also feel like people are more transparent outside of Chennai about exactly what's on the table. Like, this is how much we can pay you. This is the travel budget. This is the fees, and like whatever, you're going to stay in the hotel or you're going to stay in someone's house. I feel like everything is a little bit more like, okay, I know what's happening. There are no surprises here, right?
Yeah, I agree that definitely there's little bit better in that sense, because there are cases in Chennai where at least 3-4 years back I've been in situations where I didn't know how much I was going to get paid at all, and only after the concert you open the cover and you're either surprised, like in a nice way or in a sad way, whatever. That has happened. Yeah, I agree with you. There's a little more transparency in that sense, but yeah, when we get into the details, each case is different.
Awesome. Yeah, so I actually wanted to switch gears a little bit and talk to you all about a particular a niche that many of you have perhaps occupied or thought about as it comes to the music industry and touring. And I wanted to actually start with Nadi, and I want you to speak to what your general experience has been about your kind of mecca, or what you've been conditioned to see as the mecca of your performing art is going to Chennai and performing there. And you've said to us before that there are actually reasons that you don't do that. So I was wondering, when did you make that decision? First off, actually, let me back up first. When did you hear that this was sort of the way things are? And then when did you find out that this was problematic? And then when did you make the decision not to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I love going to Chennai. Don't get me wrong. I love season. I love going to concerts. I mean, I love meeting friends, eating doshas, all the dosha comments in the chat. And I'm really hungry, but and I can't wait to do it again. And in the beginning, a lot of my the very first time I went, I did perform, but it was a small concert. Padmini Aunty sort of arranged it for me. And whenever I started learning with Lakshman Master, his point was performing does help you learn. And performing Margam specifically, performing Varnams, learning, and most of the teachers and mentors at the time were like, this is a really important part of learning. And I do agree that the practice and performance of like the Bharatanatyam repertoire is a really important part of learning. And for me, going to Chennai and performing was about performing for my teacher and really getting that feedback. And so I would have class, whether he came here or I was in Chennai, like we'd have class multiple times a year, like I would go to Chennai twice a year and he would come here, and I would have like 3 or 4 concerts, and each concert next day corrections, and that sort of like intense learning was so amazing, and I didn't since most of my like decisions about style and the kind of dance I wanted to do came as an adult, I was really like in the thick of that in my 20s. Versus I know some people, if their parents are musicians or dancers, maybe all of that was imbibed at an early age. But for me, I felt like I was discovering that and still discovering it, as an adult, and that is expensive. But for me, Chennai was that. It was like audience was important, but the support from my guru and my friends and getting feedback from very particular people was extremely important for my journey. But I mean, I don't have family in Chennai. When I go, I stay in Woodlands. It is the expense of class, everything. It was really getting to, so anything I made, a good portion was going to Chennai. And that was my decision, of course. But after a certain number of years, I was actually getting a lot more paid commissions and gigs in the US, which required my time. And so it sort of naturally fell out of priorities. It wasn't that I didn't want to go. It really was a time thing. And December and those 2 weeks and Christmas is like the only time I had with my kids, and because I work all the time. And so it really became this thing where I couldn't go to Chennai during that season because of time and money. That's not to say I wouldn't go again. It's just like where it fell after 5 or 6 years.
Very
That
interesting.
wasn't how it was.
Super interesting because actually, Ananta, you had mentioned that you don't do US tours anymore. Is that correct?
Well, I'm going to be very specific about it.
Sure.
I don't find the current model for the way North American organizations for the South Asian community bring artists from India primarily on the basis of doing Friday, Saturday, Sunday concerts. So for me, I'm more profitable to stay in India rather than go for these tours. And that it wasn't always like that. But over the last few years, I think I find myself to be more important to the work that I'm doing in India professionally. And so to go back to a couple of things, I think Shreya had said, is that it depends what kind of concert you do in Chennai. So there are concerts in Chennai that have paid me more than overseas concerts. And there are concerts in Chennai where I've known what it is that I'm going to get paid. I mean, generally, that's a practice that I think I've been fortunate enough to benefit from. But I think the U.S. concert circuit of waiting 4 days a week to then make yourself useful kind of tires me out a little bit. And so I'm happy to spend the time in India instead of going for long months away. But that being said, I think one thing I'd like to acknowledge is that for many artists, I understand that the US tour is definitely worth it. And I think if that's good for them, they should continue to do that. But I would really play hardball for a second and ask, what is the demand for the music there? Because a lot of times I find that there is a lack of acknowledgement for the incredible kindness and generosity that all of these North American families have in hosting, in arranging, in double, duties of being a professional elsewhere, yet putting up these concerts, driving artists, and a lot of times it's kind of like, we talk about CSR, so corporate social responsibility in India, but I feel like the real kind of CSR is in kind of the way these North American families kind of roll out the red carpet for Indian artists to come from Chennai and other parts of India to spend 3 months sometimes, at various people's homes. They take them into their homes, they feed them. And so that kind of system is, while it's beautiful, in some place, we have to ask some questions as what then is the demand of what this music has there. And so for me, when I kind of addressed those questions for myself, I found it was more useful to, not accept all of those North American tours.
That's great to hear. Neha, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, so just as we wrap up this section, I think the one thread that sort of flows through this is that, there are certain pain points that we can all perhaps agree on, but that doesn't mean that that restricts you from taking on a certain opportunity or perhaps coming to the US to perform or going to Chennai or other parts of India. What I've really gotten out of it is something that isn't necessarily instilled in us, is that there is no one size fits all, but all of you are very intentional artists, and you've really taken the time and the due diligence to find what gives you value and also balance that out with what is financially, fiscally viable for you to perform. So it's sort of this balancing act of these two states, right, that have to come together. And that's something that we're not often taught or instilled from an early age. It's often perform as much as you can. You should be grateful for every opportunity. And that sort of flows into my next section. When we really think about how our arts have specifically changed, thinking about the Carnatic music and Bharatanatyam field, we briefly mentioned that this is an art that for a long time has been propagated through patronage, through royal kings and courts at some point. And a lot of those artists at that point were hereditary artists who for generations were perhaps bound, maybe by free will, perhaps sometimes not, depending on the situation, to their circumstances. And they were sort of the torchbearers of this art. And then you sort of get, I'm really boiling this down because we could have a panel about this history itself, right, for 2 hours, but just to sort of situate us, think about the trajectory of where we are today. Then sort of what happens is post-colonial India, you have this patronage system sort of fall apart. And instead, it's taken up by the Sabha system. And it is really important to acknowledge that the people that now controlled this system were perhaps not these hereditary artists anymore. It was people who are upper class and upper caste, mostly Brahmin in our situation. And those were also the people who are continuing this art form, right? Carnatic music, Bharatanatyam, Sadhya, so on and so forth. So the money sort of sat within our community, and also for the most part, the people who are performing as well. And, we have made some progress today with that, but still that's sort of where we are situated, so to say, right? And as this tradition sort of flowed, something that has been instilled in all of us who have learned this art form, and that is all of us here on this panel, is that we should do arts for the art's sake. For some reason, that has been like a quote we have all heard. And it is also somewhat detrimental, right, when we think about the marketplace. So because we think about the Sabha system and how the artists have evolved, when as the Carnatic music industry, I'm taking as an example, if you look at how it sort of evolved in the 50s, 60s, 70s, you really had this like heyday of artists. You had this upper echelon, you had these top artists, and then you didn't really have many people in the mid and bottom tiers, right? But then you sort of get to the 80s and 90s, and there's this proliferation in the both Carnatic music and dance field. Now the market is completely saturated. You have so many artists who are sort of at the top. And even more so, you have a lot of people who are like quote unquote mid-tier. And now you have All India Radio coming in and sort of grading and ranking these artists, right? So now you have so many more fish in the pond, or now the ocean to say, who are competing for the same amount of slots. It's not like the slots have exponentially expanded to fit the market. So you have that happening. And then you also have this traditional view of doing arts for the art's sake. And I really want all of our panelists to expound on that. What has been your maybe sort of this guilt weighing on you with being situated in where we are right now, of thinking, I've never been encouraged to ask for money, but now I'm taking this up as full-time or dual career. I'm taking this up professionally, and I have to now differentiate myself in this market that's relatively saturated, and I have to ask for money. Like, what are some of those pain points that you felt? And Rohit, if you want to start, that would be amazing.
Yeah. I was chatting with y'all about this earlier, which is like the whole thing about, the stigma associated with money, and, how often do you get music for free, right? You go to someone's house for Golu and it's like, okay, you're basically doing 8 hours of singing, or, no matter what, it's always available to you. And then when the same person, the same, say, performer and the same audience member is put in a different situation to then ask for money, you feel discomfort in doing that. And I personally have always just carried this thing of money is uncomfortable. And, similar to Nadi with my job also at Berkeley, we're doing a lot of fundraising. We're not funded by the college. So, from our salaries to staples to printouts, everything is we fundraise for. And one of the things we discuss a lot is sort of rewiring our brains to think about money as just a different form of energy. Maybe music is energy, I think we can all agree on that, or giving someone a hug, or chatting with someone, or giving someone advice and sitting down with them for an hour. And money is just a different column in that spreadsheet. And realizing that there are people who the best, most honest, genuine way they can engage with you and your art is to just sign you a check, and there's some people who don't want more than that. And that's their way of engaging with you. And I feel like being on the receiving end of that is the hard part. because they know they're excited about what you do, and that's how they want to help you out. And it's for us reconciling that in our head of that's okay to take that, and it doesn't have to be transactional. You don't have to necessarily always think, oh, I have to do something for you in return. I'll arrange a song for you, or I'll do a house concert just for you and your family and your dogs. It's like you can take it as patronage, and that's totally fine. There are obviously situations where you can do things for free, and I think we've all done that. But I think that if we start from a place of my time is valuable, and we all understand the value of that, and if we start at that place, and then we can say, okay, in this situation we won't maybe take a payment for that and do it the reverse way. I think that really helps, and it helps everyone be present and engaged and excited sort of about that, whatever it is, a recording, a show.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, I really like that. And so, I mean, Ashwat, I actually wanted to ask you, so is there anything about, money being uncomfortable? Is that something that you felt growing up? Was there perhaps some sort of subliminal messaging that this perhaps should not be valued monetarily? And how do you feel about that as you accept these checks from places? Is there any conflict there?
Well, yeah. So as I think many of us might have gone through that, where when we are growing up, we are kind of, a lot of things are taught to us, being able to even sing, especially Carnatic music, is something of a great blessing that gods have showered from the heavens, and you should be so lucky to do this, and then you should not make this about money at all. This is something that you should so much of devotional value and all those things. So these are things that you've grown up with, and when we actually hit the road, and when there's a place where we need to talk about these things, we are not taught these things. At least I was not taught how to negotiate, how to talk about money, what to ask. These things were never taught, right? So there's always this conflict of whether I am doing the right thing. Should I ask for money? Is asking for money wrong? And there's also this whole notion of if you talk money, then you're not like too ethical, or kind of these kind of notions also that keeps going around, and a lot of organizers take offense to the fact that you actually ask for money, things like that. So there are so many conflicts that happen, and to actually find a balance there, and to uh, find your way out, I think you just need to be lucky to do that, unless someone actually guides you to do it or something like that. Especially when you're at the starting years of your career, I just feel like not many teachers actually have that conversation with their students, or parents having that conversation with their students, where they actually realize what it is to actually value what they're doing monetarily, right? Otherwise, there is definitely discussions around valuing it, but monetarily valuing it, I don't know how many conversations have happened between the stakeholders there, and at least I was not privy to that. And I think in my experience of discussing this with many people, I think people who actually made it up there probably got lucky, or just had the right interventions at the right moment with different people, guiding them in the right way. I don't know how it works, but there is no system, or there is no guidance mechanism that is in place to actually let students be able to value what their time is. That's not the case in an IT services situation, or any other professional job that you are in. Um, there are standards, and there are there are processes, there are guidelines to how to value someone's time, and there are slabs to each, based on qualification, based on their experience, based on stature, based whatever n number of things. But those guidelines don't exist here, and so there is each one has their own way of doing it, and not everyone gets lucky there. It's how I feel.
Yes, I mean, you touched on a really great point. There are certain standards, right? But are they codified? Perhaps not. But and instead they're rather implicit. And that's sort of pivoting to our next section here. So we have spent a great deal of time talking about each of your individual experiences and navigating some of these pain points. But just sort of brainstorming here. And no one here is holding you guys to being like the visionaries for the future in this case. But I wanted to sort of informally ask our panelists today, what do you think some of our potential solutions can be? And again, we could spend hours and hours discussing this, and we're giving it about like 15 minutes. So no one is being held to this, but I think there are certain experiences that all of you have had performing that you've then reflected on and been like, maybe if we did things this way, this could help our industry as a whole, or even the respective industries. So Ashwat, if you want to start on that, and Nadi, I know we've talked about this as well from some of your experiences in London, so if you want to follow with that, some comments, that would be great.
My one potential solution that I can think of is something that I take from the examples of the Cine Musicians Union, right? All the musicians who play for Indian film music have a union where they're registered to, where work and the payments that they are given are by the hour or by what they call as call sheet, 3 hours or 4 hours or something like that, and they have a very standard guideline that is followed, and that is actually followed to the T. A lot of musicians benefit from that, right? And the union is very strong and things like that. So I believe that some equivalent of a union that can exist in the Carnatic and the Bharatanatyam fraternity, which will talk about not only financial guidelines but general guidelines around how to what are the minimal things to be there to host a concert, or what are the things to be done, what are the various parameters to be considered, what's the minimum wage that needs to be given, different cadres of artists, blah blah blah, various things that can be put together in a structured manner where there's a process that takes care of these things. I think that can give a lot of hope to people who are taking in the arts full time, to give them some kind of sustenance. This is how I see it.
That's great. Yeah, and Nadi, yeah, maybe you could comment on that. What your thoughts are on that, and maybe Ananta and Rohit as well. Just brief thoughts on that particular solution, and also maybe perhaps more fundamental things like how do we fundamentally value these things more? And all of us spoke to ticketing and the mentality surrounding ticketing at some point or another. Does that need to change? Yeah.
I mean, I think as artists, we need to be asking questions, and I think there's a lot of politics, of course, like of who is asking and gender and power structures. And there's a lot of elements in the room when you ask a question about payment. But I think Neha and I, when we were talking about like, what's the first question? Like the first question for me is, what is the budget? What is your budget to have us perform? And just to even acknowledge that there should be a budget, I mean, comes with that question, right? And so it's not only asking for ourselves, but it's also a teaching moment for maybe some organizers who don't really know that this is the thing now, and what is the budget? And then even for dancers, if they're coming to dance for me, or dance for someone else, I encourage them to ask, like, what is your stipend? What is the budget for my time? And is everyone getting paid? And I don't want the dancers that work with me who are contracted for my project. Like, I don't want them to feel like, okay, they only get paid in these shows. We're not making this huge, we're just compensating for time. No one's making a huge profit here. I want to know if this is not what I'd be doing if I was trying to make money. But like, if you go to another person who's also doing a production with musicians, new music, a ticketed show, a self-producing show, like, what is the budget for my time? And I'm driving, I'm paying for Ubers, I'm paying for public transportation, I'm paying for my childcare. Like, just ask the question. And I'm not saying everyone will have a huge budget, but I think putting that out there as a part of our culture is a really important first step. And yeah, we just can't. And now I don't do things for free. Like, I don't do performances for free anymore. And of course that was not the case early on, but I just can't. And also understanding that the market is much bigger than we think. And it is not just what we've seen growing up. There is a bigger market out there of people who can pay more. And it's not that, okay, I only want to go with people who pay more, but there's also a respect, like, of they're able to even give us everything we need for our show, like the projection, the lights, those kind of things. are important to me as well. So it's not just about money. And I think Ananta touched on this a little. It's that generosity between two different people. And there are so many ways to be generous. Like I'm being generous with my piece and what like this production I birthed, you know, and organizers have to be generous with what we have access to. So we have a stage manager. Do we have, you know, so there are a lot of ways to like negotiate value in that way. But I think the first step is, God, what is the budget? And that will dictate how many dancers can come, how many musicians can come to your gig, you know.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
I think that's so important, and something that I have constantly just been reminded throughout this conversation. You know, I play violin myself, and you know, I have played as part of like live orchestra for dance, but there implicitly is almost like a higher barrier to performance entry, like monetary value in the dance world, because there are costumes. If you are having live orchestra, are you paying those musicians? Even if you're doing recorded work, have you commissioned that work? Have you licensed that work? You have to get performance, you have to get rehearsal spaces. Musicians are a little bit more flexible. Perhaps we don't always need a formal performance space, or we don't need the physical space that dancers need, right? There's costumes, there's all of these things that go into it, you know, stage management and lighting. So I think it's really important for all of us to acknowledge that. And it might seem really obvious to people who are in the industry, but this is about engaging all the stakeholders involved as well, right? So even to an audience member, it's important to value all of those components that go in, and to especially to an organizer in this case, when you're asking what the budget is. You know, you made a really great point there. And also,
And I
Ashwat,
feel
like
like
when, oh, go ahead, Rohit.
I was gonna say, I feel like audiences are generally receptive to knowing these things. I feel like we think that we should hoard all this information, or we should some sort of shame associated with telling people all these costs. But generally, audiences are much more engaged when they know, you know, these things. Like I did a Kickstarter, and that was really where I first learned this, where you kind of have to lay everything out. The studio costs this much. The engineer and the assistant and the intern cost this much. You got to buy lunch for everybody at the studio and all these things. And when they know that, they're actually, you know, you think if you put this out, it's going to deter them. They're just going to like, you know, leave. But they're actually more engaged when they know all this information. And then even internally with people, you discourage people from talking about things like, is all the orchestra getting paid the same, you know, or are all the dancers in the company getting paid the same? And how are we valuing those people in a 60-minute show? You know, are you paying the person who plays 45 minutes versus the person who plays 48 minutes more? Or is there some, you know, some personal investment involved in how much you're paying each of these people? And then we encourage people not to talk about it. Don't talk about your salary. Don't talk about how much you're getting paid. And I think it just makes everything much more, I think transparency just helps everything across the board. And, you know, talking about things makes it easier with the audience and within the group.
I wanted
to know, you know, if anyone else has anything to like say about this before we move on to Q&A, because I think this is definitely an important conversation. Want to take the time to acknowledge everything.
I'd like to say one thing very quickly without prolonging something. And I think I don't know if it's agreeable to everybody, but this is how I feel about it. I think I'll be very specific. I, as an artist, have the power to remain an artist my whole life. A Sabha secretary, an organization, a grant committee, these are all temporary entities. So if you got rejected once, that's fine. There's a chance that you might get accepted the next time. Or it's just that whatever it is that I did as an artist wasn't agreeable to those people. It doesn't mean that suddenly we need to lose our spines as artists and then take on all kinds of work that we don't find ourselves wanting to do. And so the moment we can stand proudly with the confidence to say that this is not a zero-sum game, this is something where I stand to gain, the better I become, the more diverse I become. Are there other ways that you can become a stronger artist? And of course, it's easy here to sit here and say all this, you know, but that's kind of really what I've done for myself, in the sense that if there are avenues where I'm not getting what I wanted, I found another place. And that means I had to change what I did a little bit. That sometimes that's tough, but I'm very confident that I'm going to be able to be fair to myself, fair to my audience, and still succeed. And that's something that I think if across the board artists are able to kind of maintain that. And I know financially sometimes it's very tough and so many things go against you, but we do have that power in us. And that's something that I would like to do collectively for more than myself, is to say that, if I'm able to do it, there are people more talented than me. And, and I would wish them that they actually just stay in it, figure out another way. And surely there is a way that you get it on your terms. And I don't know. I don't want to say that dreams come true or something, but they can, and we have to be in a position to want it. And I hope that happens.
Neha, can I say one thing for 30 seconds, and I promise I'll shut up after that?
Of course, please.
I completely agree with what Ananta said. I just concluding what I'd like to say from an arts manager's perspective is that until you pay to perform, you'll never know your value in the market. So you cannot perform until you perform for free, even if you don't pay. Until you keep performing for free, you'll never know your value in the market. A great way to assess your value in the market is to see your peers and people in your level and how much they are charging. It's good to talk to those people openly about how much they're charging in the market and how much they think they should be charged in the market. You also want to charge yourself differently for various different programs and identify what actually your value is in the market. Third thing is, I'm not saying don't perform for free. And I've said this many other times before, that on three occasions that I believe I would tell my client, okay, you can perform for free. One is if it's for a favor or if it's an exchange, right? Somebody did something for you, you want to do something for me, that's fine. The second one, if it's a fundraiser, if it's a good cause, something for the betterment of society, okay, no problem. The third thing is you're trying to break into a new market. And this is the tricky part. People try to break into a market for years, right? And so you can't perform for years. You have to be very strategic. You have to be very conscious on where you're performing and why you're performing and how that's going to deter not only your career and your growth, but how it's going to affect everyone else, right? And the fourth thing is really be aware of your privilege every time you perform for free. This game is not easy, and you have to play it fairly, keeping not only yourself, but the whole community in check. And the last point I'd like to say is building value is directly associated with audience development. If you cannot build an audience for yourself and a brand for yourself, this is not going to work. And that doesn't mean having 50,000 people on Instagram, because at the moment, from where I can see, a digital following is not converting to bums on seats so far. I'm not saying it's not going to be like that, but I think that it's about building that brand, and that audience is really what's going to up your value. That's it.
That was fantastic, Shreya. I'm sorry if we rushed you to go through that, because honestly, you were so succinct in sort of summarizing that, and I think everyone sort of had really great points. Just my high level takeaway is be flexible, don't pigeonhole yourself, really understand your value and for each performance, why you are there, and be transparent. Every stakeholder should be more transparent. Talk about the costs, talk about what's going on. And sort of Ashwat, what I got from, thinking about unionizing or maybe creating these standards is that there should be set floors for each sort of tier of stakeholder artists. There needs to be a floor price. The floor price isn't free. There is an actual, dollar rupee amount associated with the floor price. And that's really important for us to take away. And actually, just to sort of be respectful of everyone's time, I know we have tons more to say here, but I wanted to open it up to the audience Q&A, because we did have some fantastic members of the audience join us via our YouTube live link. So Priyanka, who's on our Care Spaces team, if you could come forward and maybe relay some of those questions and open it up to our panelists, that would be great.
Yeah, of course. Thank you all so much for being here and for all of your insights so far. We've gotten a lot of really good questions through both our RSVP forum as well as our YouTube link from people all over the world. So wanted to start with one question we got from the RSVP forum, and I think Rohit, you might be good to answer this question. So this question is, how much importance should one place on external validations such as certifications, et cetera? Maybe from your experience attending Berkeley College and actually having your degree, do you think that that has a bearing on how you value yourself and your own work now, having that external degree?
I probably shouldn't say this as an employee of Berkeley, but I don't know that it actually does. I mean, there's definitely like, at the lowest level, if you tell someone, oh, I went to Berkeley, that may get a foot in the door, or like a toe in the door. And even then, it's not even about the certification. For example, we love to say John Mayer went to Berkeley, and he was at Berkeley for I think 2 semesters. He never graduated, and I think it's just being able to claim the name, which again, it'll get you so far, but especially in this world, it's just it's about personal relationships, and these building. I think Ananta talked about this earlier, which is like you want to be friends with this person that you're working with, because when you create with someone that you connect with at a different level, it translates, and the certifications are a thing, and people love to say, oh, I have grade insert number here, piano this, or Trinity College this, or whatever it might be. But at the end of the day, if you can share space with someone for 4 hours, and that's a certification that you'll actually carry with you to the next gig and call them because of that, not because they have a bachelor's in music therapy from Berkeley.
Awesome.
Yeah, and kind of pivoting to Ashwath, actually, someone asked this question on YouTube, but it actually relates to another RSVP form question that we got specifically about your dual careers. So someone from YouTube was asking about what your trade-off looks like in terms of time and effort that you put into your art when it comes to your dual careers. And maybe also like how that might factor into your decision-making process when choosing whether to take certain concert opportunities or not, whether like organizers are valuing you financially or not.
I think I briefly touched upon it, but yeah, let me answer it specifically. Yeah, regarding the time that I'm able to spend, I think that depends on the nature of the job. So my job as such is very supportive, and the firm that I work for, the management is my CEO is a huge fan of Carnatic music, and things have worked out really well in terms of what I offer them and how they're able to support me in my art form as well. So that's kind of formed a very symbiotic bond between me and the firm in that sense. So I'm able to whatever time I need to devote every day for practice and other things are definitely available for me, and that's the nature of the job that I've taken up. And in terms of accepting or not accepting concerts, I think, as I said, I definitely do have the comfort of saying no to a few opportunities which I don't see are of value either in terms of musical value or financial value or whatever the value could be. I definitely have that privilege of saying no, but another reason to say no or to not undervalue myself is to make sure my peers, my competitors are also not affected by it. So that's how I manage the show.
Yeah, would anyone else like to comment on that as well? Maybe in terms of like decision-making processes when thinking about accepting certain concert opportunities?
Yeah, Ananta, you had touched upon your happiness quotient when we talked briefly. Can you explain what
Yeah,
you did?
I mean, I don't know if I went into it earlier, or maybe I spoke about it. For me, it's many things. One is getting paid for what I do, and sometimes I really want to make some music with somebody, and that gives me more happiness than the paycheck. At other times, you want to kind of evaluate these two things and figure out what percentage is the money, what percentage is the experience, and primarily that's something that also motivates me in trying to figure out, do I want to be a part of this cumulative experience, right? That's the audience, that's the artist, that's me, that's the organizer. And for me, everybody has to have a good time. It can't be that somebody spent a ton of money and of course the art was great, but then the next day, they're like, you know, in a much more financially dark position. So it has to make sense for everybody. And sometimes we get those events and those programs, and that's a great thing to know. Okay, what are the things that went right? And then there are times where, I take a risk and I say, I think this could be a good thing, and I take that opportunity, and I still make a mistake, and that's life. It's fine. It's something that I have to learn from for the next time. But the happiness quotient is something that I found out for myself, just a few years ago. And then I found out that the moment I figure out, in some ways, of course, you don't know everything that comes at you before. If I figure out, am I going to be happy doing this with a little bit of less pay, and just know that this is the kind of event it is, and then I'm happy to do it. And so, and that, goes back to one other thing in teaching at KM, right? And being on the faculty at KM Music Institute. It's one part is financial. Yes. It's nice to have that, support system. But what I really like there is not the money. It's the ability to get out of this ego feedback of finishing a concert and then going on social media and then seeing people, do whatever they do. It's to completely remove me from that world and give my time to a student who needs, my help. At that point, I'm in a position to give something else. And so for me, that's a decision-making thing where I'd say, I'd like to, take a concert, but then I need to be back at work the next day. And so if I can have both of those things, then it's great.
I have a question for you, actually, going back to your happiness quotient point, which is like, have you taken a gig, for example, where maybe you musically or creatively it didn't satisfy you to the fullest extent, but the people that you were playing with are people that you enjoy making music with? Has that ever been a situation for you?
Sorry, I chose a concert where I didn't get paid, but playing music with
the TLDR, the short version is, have you ever taken a gig where you don't like the music, but you like the people you're playing with?
I don't think so. If I like the person and I don't like yeah, I think so. I mean, I must have, right? That happens. But more and more, there is a combination of both of those things that are in their favor, or for me, I like them and I like their music.
That's also something that goes along with overall risk taking too, right? I mean, if you're meeting somebody for the first time, you think you get along, and then you don't know what their music is like. You go, you do it, and you're like, maybe this wasn't the best choice. It's kind of a learning process. It's an iterative feedback loop, right?
I mean, just to add a little bit of humor, there's so many situations where, I've gone into the event thinking this is going to be great. And the organizer, or, not even, Indian or any, like, I once played a concert advertised as Samantha R. Krishnan. And so people were like expecting a woman, and I show up and then they're like, what? Wait, so it's all that it's fine. It makes you, want to get it right the next time.
That's how you add a clause to your contract. Every line in a contract is
I just
story.
leave gender blank,
I think, everybody the Samantha clause.
You read contracts and you'd be like, okay, there is trauma associated with this clause. You could see it in the contract that there's no reason for this to be in here other than, someone was provided something or not provided something.
So yeah, that's part of the risk, but it's fine. We have something else to talk about later.
All right, Priyanka.
Yeah, and actually, Shreya, if we can pivot to you and ask a couple questions about financial misconduct specifically. So maybe around how you've advised artists who may have experienced financial misconduct, and also how that kind of factors into like monetizing art when it comes to digital platforms.
It's tough to answer this without a specific case. Do you think you can give me something a bit more specific that I can answer? Because it's a very broad, because each case is different, right?
Yeah, so I mean, another question that was asked was specifically around fundraising avenues for artists in India, which you did touch on a little bit during the panel. But maybe like, or have there been any cases where artists have in India like explored some of these fundraising avenues and then have found that it might not be as fair, or it might not compensate them the way that they're looking for?
Okay, again, big question. Okay, let me try and answer the financial misconduct and the fundraising thing, right? Yeah, first of all, the idea of creating a broad system for fundraising is still nascent in India. We do have certain patrons who do support certain artists and the general sector also at some level, but not at the level where artists are not able to right now. Okay, artists are not able to fundraise specifically. They have certain people who support them in their lives, and they sort of come back and continue to support them, right? Because they're not necessarily able to make their ends meet. But what we do at SNS is really we try to cultivate a set of donors, and that's what we have done over the last 3 to 5 years. Is really cultivating a set of donors who believe and want to invest in the arts and invest in a certain sector within the arts. That could be Kattekutu, that could be a contemporary artist, that could be a percussionist, whatever, right? It could also be for artists who want to do more research-based work, Andamari, right? So what we do is we cultivate certain donors. And so when an artist comes and says, hey, I need help with this and this, or I need this sort of training in order for me to up my game as an artist, then I know I can go to this certain donor because I know that interest matches the artist, and the artist, that's how it really works with fundraising with us, right? Otherwise, broadly in India, fundraising, the structure isn't there. It's not like the US model of fundraising where there is a structure, there is an annual fund, there is a gala, there is a quarter of the budget that you can raise through the gala. There is all of these systems, right, which we are trying to create. What SNS is trying to do is we're trying to create those systems by enabling and educating artists on how this works, because there is a method and you can make it work. It's just we all have to play the same game. If Rohit fundraises differently from me versus Priyanka versus Ashwath, we're not going to be doing this together, which is why in one of my videos itself, I said that we have to professionalize it together with the same house rules. With regard to financial misconduct, yes, it happens very often. And I have gotten hired to just go and deal with that situation, right? Just saying, hey, X was supposed to make this amount of money and it's not happening. So can you go do it because I don't know how to do it? Or I get hired sometimes just to go and be with the client to negotiate. The only thing that I do, Priyanka, which I can tell everybody, is that I don't negotiate on behalf of the artist. I always take the artist with me, because my idea is not to be sitting and negotiating for artists. Artists have to learn to do this for themselves. Artists have to be comfortable talking about money. And if they're not going to be comfortable talking about money, if I'm going to be doing it. So I take them with me and we have a certain conversation that we're going to say, I'm going to say this, you're going to say that, this is what we're going to do, this is the agreement, right? And I always say, even if it's a small thing, if you don't want to sign a contract, that's fine. Put it in an email, and unless they have replied to the email, it does not stand, right? You do not get up on that stage until they have signed that email. WhatsApp, I mean, it's doable. It can work in court because it's written, but no. And even after that, there are people who don't pay them on price, and they say, or, oh, you didn't make as much money, or, blah, blah, blah. The sponsor didn't pay me, so I'm not going to get paid. And all of that still does happen. But at the end of the day, it's like, are you ready to go to court, right? And is that worth that much amount of money? So it's these sort of situations. And yes, sometimes I have encouraged my clients to go to a lawyer and actually pursue this. And sometimes I've just said, I don't think it's worth this money, but let's see what we can do next time that this won't happen. And that really is being very upfront on what's going to happen, who's going to be paying, what are those things, paying 50% ahead of time, preferably, especially if it's a non-Sabha concert. And if it's a private gig, then definitely paying a 50% upfront and 50% after. So those sort of things, right? But like I said, at the end of the day, my aim is not to sit and do all of this for artists. My aim is to build that capacity for artists to be able to talk. Because at the end of the day, artists need to be rich, man. And artists cannot be afraid to talk about money or even feel shy about it. I mean, that's what we do. I mean, our whole thing is just working on the business of the arts. If you are not ready to talk about money, I'm not interested in talking about you. My business model depends on the fact that you make money. So if you're not ready to make money or you're not ready to talk about money, I don't know what I'm doing here, right?
Thanks
so
so much.
I am very clear that this is why I want to work with artists.
Thanks so much. Yeah. So Priyanka, we actually have one last question, I think, for Nadi. Is that right?
Yeah, we have one more. So Nadi, someone from YouTube had kind of mentioned an anecdote about potentially like some dancers or artists advocating that other people dance or perform for free. So I'd say like kind of calling on your experience of like kind of learning to pay yourself for your work and looking at grants to be able to pay yourself and dancers, what's some advice that you would give to people that are in a place of thinking they might need to choose between growth and opportunities and paying themselves?
Paying yourself. So if you think in a way, if this is like a business, right, there is some amount of investment that someone makes into a business. Granted, this is a nonprofit business, so it's a little weird, but as a company, but there is in the beginning, like performing for free or investing in your rehearsal time, like that makes sense. But there is a certain threshold, which you realize in your career where you're putting so much time in and you can't not pay yourself anymore because it's your livelihood. And of course, I've had side hustles. I've done random jobs to support myself. I'm not under any like illusions that we don't need money. Like you definitely need to support yourself. But and there definitely have been people like, I want you to perform for me. Can you do it for free because I can get other people to do it for free? It's happened many, like, and my answer is no. Like that's not. It just especially when it comes at me like that. I just feel like it's not that I haven't performed for free before, but when no, that's just gonna hurt everyone. And I feel like as a dancer, you can make that choice. Like it's up to you if you're gonna be a teacher and you want to create community theater where like that's also very important for our culture and our families, like to create opportunities for young performers and students, like that's there. But as a dancer, you can decide if you're not feeling like you're getting the opportunities that are paid. Like for me, I started self-producing. And I relied on, you can rely on your community for tickets. You can rely on Kickstarter. There's also like this culture that you need to create depending on where you are in your career of like how your time is valued. And if that means the Kickstarter was an important part for our company in the beginning. We've done 2, and that it puts it all out there. These are the expenses that we have. Yes, we want to pay ourselves, but at the very least, we need to cover our expenses if you want to see this show. So I think it's creating that culture of like, this costs money to do, and our time is valuable. And if you want us to be available for a show in 3 months, that we need this many rehearsal hours to make ourselves available for your show. So it's creating the culture, but understanding like you also have the power to take or create the gigs that get where you want to be as an artist, and also like show your value. I hope that answers that person's question. And there's also, I want to add that Chennai has not only provided like an opportunity to perform, like obviously was a lot of connections are made through Chennai that actually that's how I got my other jobs throughout the world. So like being present in those personal relationships, like Rohit was saying, is really important. Like inserting yourself into the industry, not just through performance, but through coffees and lunches and networking events. Like all that is really important. And like that's how I met Suraj. I think he's watching. Suraj and Sita and Kamala and all these people that I've worked for in London. And I've learned a lot from their pay structures and their models. So I think you really have to put yourself out there, and you can't just sit there and wait for opportunities. Like it's a super active job. You have to be out there and really making those connections.
Yeah, thank you all so much. I know that we have tons of more questions, but unfortunately, we do want to respect everyone's time here. I know it's getting late in India, and our panelists from the West Coast joined us pretty early. So honestly, with that said, I just want to say a few things to conclude this panel. I think some of our high level takeaways, at least what I've gained personally and sort of drawn from all of your experiences, is that, we currently operate in a relatively saturated market. And it's almost like there are all these odds against us that deflate the value of artists in this space. Not just artists, organizers, arts consultants, you're really going against the current. So you are your biggest advocate. And if that means that you need the people that you interact with to be more transparent, sign a contract, just communicate about your expenses, you need to do that. You need to take charge. And we've also seen everyone sort of admit the fact that they have either had to be flexible in the sort of performance opportunities that they take on, or have a dual career or, a quote unquote side hustle to sustain themselves. So really understand that the next time you as a consumer hesitate to pay for a performance. Understand that you might value one of these panelists as the top performer in their field, in their niche, but you are somehow hesitating to perhaps pay to watch them perform. And something that I always draw an analogy to is that especially thinking about the US consumer market, we will pay hundreds of dollars. The same person, mama, mommy, for just so to say, will pay $200 to go see someone perform at the Lincoln Center at Carnegie Hall. But when Ananta, I'm just giving you as an example, when Ananta comes, for example, and performs, they'll be like, oh, it's a $25 ticket. Oh, this isn't a free concert. I have heard that so many times. And I'm like, you are valuing Anantas, perhaps. I'm sorry to keep using you as the example, but just to
Just
make
say
it
Samantha. It's okay.
Samantha
sure,
Arthur.
yeah. So you value Samantha as maybe the best Mridangist or one of the top Mridangist,
There we go.
but you are perhaps complaining about paying to watch him or her. But then this performer at Carnegie Hall, you have no problem paying $200 for a ticket like in the nosebleed seats. That is just something to put into perspective. We all need to change. You know, we had a very artist-centric and arts management-centric panel, but it's important to understand that there are multiple stakeholders here. And as a community organizer myself, I will always take the pain point of having to negotiate with people that, yeah, you might need to ticket this performance and you should be valuing this art because at the end of the day, when you think about who is sort of propagating the arts in the future, it is the members of the community. It's the audience members, right? And the audience members who then maybe put their kids into this art form, so on and so forth. So I think that's really important. And just overall, what we want to highlight here is that it doesn't matter whether you are doing this full-time, so to say, or dual career. You aptly valuing yourself helps inflate the market value, and not artificially inflate. It almost helps aptly compensate everyone else because we're struggling against multiple forces that are coming the other way. So it's important for everyone to never feel like they're being greedy, never feel like they need to do arts for the art's sake. And I sort of want to leave it off there. And Guhan, if you have any other concluding points, please go ahead.
Yeah, I sort of want to just say thank you to everybody here. You've all brought such diverse and yet representative experiences to the panel. I think we've learned not only, us two, Neha and me, we haven't been the only people learning here, and I think that's super encouraging. I think you have all learned from each other as well, and I love to see that you guys were all asking each other questions and getting to know each other better. And I really appreciate that. I appreciate the chance to get the time to talk to you guys. It's a blessing, it's a privilege. And I also appreciate the fact that we are putting out this message into the community and trying to be the change that we want to see. Because if we are not doing that ourselves, then who is going to do it? And we're very happy about that. So I'd like to also thank the backend Care Spaces and SNS teams for helping us with tech during this whole thing. And with that, I would like to conclude today's session. Thank you all for attending. And yeah, maybe we can all unmute and just clap for each other.
And just a reminder, this is part of I'm a Professional too is a 5-part series. This was session 3. We have 2 more sessions. Stay tuned. Follow Care Spaces, SNS on Instagram, Facebook, email us, sign up for our mailing list to stay tuned for the next sessions. And tag us on social media and reach out to your panelists and tell them how much you loved what you heard today. Thank you, everyone.